can we address the Miller Moss rumors?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm curious to get your take on this. I've not talked about it. I know a national writer, I think was it Pete Nakos for On3, reported that Iowa is one of like 4 teams that Miller Moss will consider when he enters the portal. So who knows where that information is coming from. However, it's worth talking about because Miller Moss is going to be somewhat highly coveted. And then some of the other schools that were on that list, I think Michigan was on the list, Louisville was on the list. Um, Iowa may be of those schools that may be the school where he has the best chance to come in and start. I will say this, though. I do have a fear with this. I'm not like a couple of years ago when they went after Cade McNamara. I was in pretty good spirits about that. I'm not as head over heels about this one. And I'll tell you why. First of all, I think we have to be very careful what we wish for. And I'm not saying he's the carbon copy of what Cade McNamara was at Michigan, but they went to Michigan, got an experienced upperclassman quarterback who not that mobile, had won a lot of games for Michigan, but it also had a lot of talent around him. And he comes to Iowa, cocky as all get out. I said that from day one. Cade McNamara came to Iowa, cocky as all get out. And how did it work out in the end? It didn't work out well. And I'm not saying that's going to be the same thing if Iowa somehow landed Miller Moss. But here you talk about another blue blood in USC. He lost the job there as the season went on. He's not that mobile, not that athletic, had a lot of offensive talent around him, had a tremendous offensive coach at the helm. I'm just saying we learn from your past mistakes. And I think you have to admit that Cade McNamara was sort of a mistake. Now, they needed somebody. They could have done better than Cade McNamara. And I don't know that Miller Moss will choose Iowa because I don't know that Iowa wants Miller Moss. My guess is that they would entertain that based on the reports that are out there. What I'd also say about Miller Moss is the only positive here for me at this point, without knowing any more than what the initial reports have been, I have more confidence now in Iowa's ability to identify talent because they have Tim Lester. And before, who was identifying this talent? Was it Brian Ferentz? Was it Kirk? Obviously, it's not hard to look at a top-tier program and say, okay, this guy's productive. But again, Cade McNamara is a perfect example of just because a guy's productive at a high major program doesn't mean he's a great fit at Iowa. And I don't know in hindsight that Cade was a great fit at Iowa. If you had to ask me who I'd rather have at this point, Brendan Sullivan or Miller Moss, I don't know that it's a slam dunk Miller Moss. Maybe it is. Maybe Miller Moss is a better quarterback. I can tell you one thing. Brendan Sullivan's a better athlete than Miller Moss. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. Brendan Sullivan, we talked about his success at Northwestern with less talent around him. We've seen him in an Iowa uniform. He hasn't been the starter for more than 2 games, 3 games, whatever it was. So I don't think if Miller Moss comes in here, he'd be the automatic starter, nor should he be. But I think these people I've seen all these burner accounts and these Hawkeye accounts on Twitter over the last 24 hours. Miller Moss, you're a Hawkeye. Like, who cares? I mean, listen, the portal window hasn't even opened yet. And maybe he will end up coming to Iowa. But I'm not going to be getting on the roof and, getting with my friends and singing Kumbaya when he does. That's not what I'm going to be doing. I think we need to really let Tim Lester do his thing. And there's lots of quarterbacks that have not announced yet they're going to be entering the portal. And I don't know that Iowa can land top tier guys, but let him pick the best guy that they can land. And I don't know that that's Miller Moss. I have no idea. To me, I'm like, what am I getting this excited about? He's a Southern California kid who got benched and is not very mobile. What am I supposed to be excited about at this point? But other than the fact that maybe this is an indication that Tim Lester likes Miller Moss. Maybe. So do you have any 2 cents before we add Elliott into the mix?
Well, you can guess where I'm headed with this. I think you know me well enough to know where my preference lies. So I'm going to go super chat. We're going to bring in Elliott. I'm going to give my thoughts. Maybe we'll give the stage to Elliott on Miller Moss, and then I would certainly like to chime in. So we've got Erica, thank you so much for the super chat. Also, Nebraska clearly doesn't know their opponent. Acting that way motivates Iowa and makes them want to beat them. Part of this is psychology. And again, of course, Iowa pulls out the victory against the Huskers. We got Elliot Clough on the line from Hawkeye Beacon on Rivals. Elliot, good to see you. How's it going?
Good to see you, Mark. Been a while. Good. Just in the bowels of Carver Hawkeye Arena waiting for Iowa to take on Northwestern here for the Big Ten opener in about 45 minutes. So apologies. I know I said I would be on closer to 5:30 Eastern, but I thought the game was at 7, and it turned out it was at 6. So that's the Central Time. So that
You're excited for that Big Ten opener, Elliot. You're there early.
Yeah. One could say that.
Elliot, we've got a couple topics to hit you with. The one that obviously we pinned you on was the recruiting. We'll get to that in just a second with National Signing Day coming up tomorrow. But the Miller Moss rumors, USC starting quarterback at the beginning of the season, benched, as Corey just outlined, for a more mobile quarterback at USC. I don't know if you've had a chance to dig into this or have seen much of Miller Moss. I have. So I've got some certain thoughts, but what are your initial thoughts on this one?
Well, first things first, the only game I kind of watched of Miller Moss this year was, I believe, Michigan, and then I guess a couple games. LSU, if I remember right, he looked pretty damn good against LSU, but he played in 9 other games, and I believe they went 4-5 with him as the starter. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard a little bit of what Corey was saying regarding the similarities between Miller Moss and the Cade McNamara situation. I think that there are and probably were some red flags that Iowa should be more aware of this time, or handle things differently this time by bringing in a player like Miller Moss. I'm not advocating for it. I think, and honestly, Corey and I don't always agree, but I'm pretty much in the same boat. What I shared with our premium subscribers is just like, and my thinking is that, don't rush this. There's no need to rush this. Miller Moss, there's going to be other programs involved that can probably bring a lot of money to the table that Iowa might not necessarily have. I don't know the exact details on numbers, but you're starting to compare Iowa to Michigan, then it's just might necessarily be over. But the way I see it is Iowa would be better served going for a G5, maybe an FCS guy that has had some really, really productive seasons at those lower levels, or going and getting, forgive me, I can't remember his name, this is just an example, but that 4-star that just decided to enter the portal from Arkansas, who has 3 years of eligibility remaining. One of these guys that maybe got buried on a depth chart, that has a bunch of talent, maybe just saw the opportunity to make a bunch of money right away, but it's now like, man, I want to play, and he can come in and compete with Brennan Sullivan. You're not bringing him in and anointing him the starter like you did with Cade McNamara. You're not rolling out the red carpet for a guy like Miller Moss, because what has he done to earn that, right? First of all. Second of all, I think they'd be better served in bringing a guy that Tim Lester can mold, that has been in college football for a year or two, learn some of the ropes of how things operate, and then you can bring in a guy that Kirk Ferentz has clearly shown some trust in Tim Lester, and allow him to mold one of these guys. Lester can go out and get one of his guys, not bring in a mercenary for a year and more or less possibly ruin that relationship with Brendan Sullivan, or see him enter the portal. There are so many different ways that this can transpire, but in my opinion, you go out and get a young guy who has the talent to compete right away, but can continue to learn from Lester and grow into something more productive here at Iowa for an extended amount of time. Not a 1-year mercenary. That's not how I think Iowa should go about it.
And Sullivan has 1 year left. Like, there's so many things about this that I don't understand. So one thing being, Kirk got suspended the first game for improper pre-portal window contact with Cade McNamara. So the fact that we have another national reporter already saying that Iowa's a school to watch for, which at the time 2 years ago, we didn't know that was an indication. We didn't know for a certainty that there had been, quote unquote, improper contact. But are we supposed to believe that this means there has been more pre-portal more pre-window contact? I find that to be odd. And if somebody's leaking that to Pete Nakos of On3, who is it that's doing that? And how stupid is that if somebody on the Iowa staff is talking to a national reporter and saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to be interested in this kid," or at all allowing Miller Moss, I almost said Cade Moss, Miller Moss to say something to a national reporter about that, even if there has been early contact, because you would think Kirk would be, this whole staff would be very careful the next time they go to the portal, especially at quarterback.